Welcome, independent researchers, skeptics, and all of humankind, to Shadow Citizen. Shadow Citizen will explore the shadows of an alternate reality. Your hosts, Rachel L. McIntosh and Rob Bosell.
Well, all right. We made it another week. Hello, everybody. This week on Shadow Citizen, we're going to continue last week's important discussion on geoengineering and 5G. I'm Rachel L. McIntosh. I'm your host of Shadow Citizen. And tonight's special guests are Jolie Diane, who was with us last week to talk about Rhode Island's H6001, which is the only anti-geoengineering bill of this type in the country. And we'll also be joined a little bit later with Susan Clarke. Susan Clarke has done a decade of research at Harvard School of Public Health as research assistant. And she has it's kind of famous at this point, a presentation that she did called Safe Technology is Smart Technology. Microwave radiation does not belong in our children's schools. And I'll put a link to that. And we're going to end up talking about not only the geoengineering that you see with the airplanes that are flying over, leaving, trails in the sky. And then there's this other aspect to it that links in with radiation that many people don't know about. And mostly, I want to have Jolie Diane back on first, if I can. I've got both of them on the line with me right now. And
hi, Rachel.
Hi. Is this Jolie?
Yeah, hi. How's it going?
Good. I'm so glad to have you back on. I was really, really excited to have that conversation with you last week. And since then, I've thought a lot about what we've talked about. And I know we need to do this show in more depth because you and I have talked a little bit since then, and I realized the people in Rhode Island, not only the rest of the world, need to understand a little bit deeper what is going on with this geoengineering stuff. So I'm glad to have you back, Jolie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so important for people to know about what's happening in terms of this invasive technology. And we are looking at geoengineering and 5G both as polluting emissions. So it's important just to have that as our center of gravity when looking at these programs. It's really great to be back here with you and with Susan. And I just wanted to kind of pull up an older document from the 1960s, and it's from the National Science Foundation. And it kind of is it's the center of gravity of what all of these space weather technologies are for. So I'm just going to pull that up here. And, Rhode Island 6011 is the mechanism to confront these technologies. And so it's very important that we do so. And this document that I'm talking about is called the Report of the Special Commission on Weather Modification. And it's from the National Science Foundation in 1965. And they're talking specifically about weather and climate modification. And that's also known as rainmaking. So we see the cloud seeding in the skies and with the exhaust emissions, pollution from the aircraft. And this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to manipulate the weather by adding pollution. And so people can go to Zero Geoengineering and look up this document that I'm referring to. It's Weather and Climate Modification Report of the Special Commission.
I'm sorry, that's zerogeoengineering.com or org?
Zerogeoengineering.com.
.com, okay. And they're going to look at which document?
It's called the Weather and Climate Modification.
Okay.
And it's a report of the Special Commission on Weather Modification, the National Science Foundation. Mm-hmm. So it's a government document, basically. And they're referencing in this document the foundations of these programs. So I really suggest that everyone take a look when they have a moment and just go through this document, and it just basically talks about all the parameters of what we're seeing now in terms of how to modify the weather. And it's a big business. It's it has military purposes. I would encourage people to go and look through that document and all of them over at Zero Geoengineering. It's just a few of the documents that people can see so they can get a sense of the history of these programs. It's really not a new thing. And another great site to go to would be weathermodificationhistory.com.
Oh, that's a good one. Weathermodificationhistory.com. Okay.
Yeah. That's another great one, just to go do some research and get familiar with the context of these programs. That's a great start for people. Because we were talking about how just people, we just don't know about these programs, for a lot of us it's new.
Right. Why is that, Jolie? Because quite frankly, I remember a couple of years ago, I was one of those people. I would hear people talking about chemtrails, and I'd be looking out my window and I'd say, no, my father was a pilot. That's not a chemtrail. I don't even know what a chemtrail is. That's a contrail coming out of a plane. And people would be pointing to them. And then I don't know what exactly happened. I think it was the day I went outside. I had my sunglasses on because I have to have sunglasses on that are prescription to see far away. And it was raining out, and I had my sunglasses on, and I looked up in the sky, and I could see those trails going through the sky. And I took my sunglasses off, and I couldn't see them. And I put them back on, and I realized it's because my sunglasses were polarized. And I was like, wait a second, that's for the glare. I was like, there's something on that line that's reflecting light that's making me notice it with my sunglasses on. So I ran outside and I got my camera and I put my sunglasses in front of my camera and away from my camera. I was like, wait a second, there's something reflecting light in that line. And that's when I became aware that something was being squirted out of airplanes to affect the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we know, any of us who are over 30 know what the sky is supposed to look like. It's supposed to be blue, and unpolluted. The degree of these operations has increased dramatically over the last 30 years or so. But exactly, people want to know what is going on in the sky. And my first learning about this was with Clifford Carnicom's work. Aerosol Crimes is a video that you should check out, and Cloud Cover. And Mr. Carnicom has done so much amazing research. Is basically a pioneer in this field of study, and someone who cares very much and has been working very hard to try to expose these programs. He worked at the Department of Defense. That's carnicominstitute.org. And I would encourage everyone to, do some research over there too. Mr. Carnicom told me that, because I too was wondering, what am I looking at up here? What are we talking about? And he told me that, using the term aerosol is effective because he pointed out to me that the court admissibility of terms is an issue when we want to litigate against these programs. And so that's sort of the maze that we have been in trying to confront these programs. Because in the term chemtrail is not a court admissible term. It was used in a document in 2001. Dennis Kucinich introduced the Space Preservation Act, HR 2977, I believe. And that specifically was talking about space weapons, and he was trying to stop space weapons. And the word chemtrail was used, And then, unfortunately, the whole bill was thrown out because it wasn't a court-admissible term. So
that's really important.
We haven't had our day in court, because they said, no, that's not a real thing. That's just a conspiracy. Next. And so that's how it happened. And so that's why, it's chemical dumps. The Air Force says it, shafts. There's a number of different things because there's many different programs that people are doing. There's, some programs, Weather Modification Incorporated, where you can make sure your wedding day is, not rainy.
Really? Wait, let me get my...
Yeah.
I should have told my sister about that one. Okay, no, wow. I didn't know that at all.
Weather Modification Incorporated, or Inc., it might be just INC.
Right.
And then, the use of weather modification was used in Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, when they flooded it out. And then, of course, they sprayed all kinds of poisons, Agent Orange, on the population and the vegetation there, and it's a very bad crime. So these programs originated out of war machinery. And that's why we're here, drawing the line and saying no, because basically this is an assault on our environment.
Well, let alone me. It's an assault on me.
Exactly. Yeah. We are the environment. We are part of the environment. We are not separate from that. And, I've noticed in science a lot, they try to keep things compartmentalized. No, we can't look at anything else other than this, the carbon factor as it has been. But, the Earth is a living organism, and it's everything is interconnected. So if you put something in the air, we are all part of that. We're all part of it, So, again, that's why we're calling out these crimes. It's environmental crimes, and hats off to Rhode Island and Representative Price for being the first state to really...
I want to bring Susan in right now for a minute. I want to bring her in because she's worked on the bill in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, we've had a horrible stint of rain since April. All of May, it was April, all of May, June, even yesterday it rained. And today's the first day it sort of looks sunny in a while. And I don't think that's any sort of coincidence that President Trump signed, what was the one that he signed? H353, which basically said it's for space weather research?
Yes, space weather research and forecasting.
So and that's the other thing too. They call this space weather as opposed to just regular weather. They're talking about space weather. So I want to talk to Susan because she's here and she actually helped compose that bill that we're talking about.
Not H353. That was the federal.
No, not that one.
I helped with the Rhode Island bill, the Rhode Island 6 of 11. Right. Certainly. Yeah, of course, calling something space weather is misrepresentative in a number of different levels. I think Jolie is right on target when she refers to geoengineering because that's what is acknowledged by all the powers that be, that they actually are doing. And as she says, this comes out of war, it comes out of military intelligence interests, and it involves assault on living beings at base. That's what it's all about. Indeed, I think I could prove that at base it's a general assault on intentioned or purpose toward ecogenocide.
Oh my gosh, that's a big word right there, genocide.
Ecogenocide.
Yeah. That's big.
But that's another thing that we could get into, but certainly it does originate from war interests. And what the state of Rhode Island is interested in doing is saying, look, if someone is interested in engaging in one of these countless geoengineering activities that involve profound effects upon Earth's atmosphere and then consequently to Earth's surface, and potentially even beyond that, then they have to have a license at least to do that. And if they don't have a license, then they can pay the state $500,000 for engaging in activity that has profound consequences to Rhode Island, to its economy, to its agriculture, to its coastal regions, its fisheries, its forests, and its people and their health and productivity and safety. So they can pay us $500,000 for each geoengineering event that they engage in if they fail to get licensed. So in other words, the licensing procedure then is required to prove that this is something that's good and necessary for Rhode Island before it goes ahead.
So in your mind, could there be good things that come out of geoengineering?
I have to smile. I can't conceive of one, but I think that Earth really needs to be restored, and Earth's system itself, which is it's a biosystem. The biosystem can be restored by humans leaving it alone rather than trying to change more things. So where there are contaminants that can be removed to a place that is more contained, maybe, but that's not what geoengineering in any case is purposed to do in all of the various programs that I've at least learned about individually. Perhaps someone has something I haven't thought about.
I want to ask another question too. How did you come up with the sum of $500,000? How did you come up with that?
That's an easy one. The person someone else had drafted some initial version of the bill saying that a fine should be $500. Look at the economic consequences of just one day of having the atmosphere filled with chaff, sulfur dioxide, all sorts of other things that Jolie can tell you about, and then also being contaminated by electromagnetic radiation in various ways. And think of what that does across the state to agriculture, to human health, productivity. The effects are profound. That Rhode Island is losing easily more than that.
Yeah, I think that's too cheap.
Sure. I mean, if you want to take it up to $1 million.
Because quite frankly, the houses here are very expensive comparatively to other parts of the country, even though our state is basically going bankrupt. The houses and the cost of living here isn't cheap.
Right.
So I'd make it more expensive. That's just me. If I ruled the world.
Well, it's a great way to do that, because then you can be generating money for the state and be like Alaska, where they give each of their citizens a stipend every month from the oil. But see, in this case, it would be from the fines. You dole it out equally among everybody, and then we're going to go after the real problem, which is the polluters. And
that's a really good idea. People would support that, because a lot of people are, the economy isn't doing so great in Rhode Island. And a lot of people, I think, would come out and support this bill if it did have some sort of payout like that.
Well, keep in mind, however, that payout is tied to damage to the biosystem. In other words, you get the payout.
Well, exactly.
The damage happens. Okay. So please keep in mind that what we're trying to do is to avoid damage primarily. Okay. That's what has to stop. Why? Because the value of the biosystem, whether that's agriculture crops or forest being left alone, or people being able to do their jobs because they can think and function and they have some health, that is all those values of nature that are sort of hard to name in a way. We're not taught how to value nature as indigenous peoples always did. That value is far more important than any money. It's what will sustain Rhode Island and keep it in existence into the future. Without that, Rhode Island will cease to exist, financially and otherwise.
Right.
We are grounded in the biosphere. It's this biosystem that allows for any human life to take place.
Right. So this bill itself, it's not technically anti-geoengineering, because it's basically coming to grips with this is going on, and it has been going on, but now we're going to take it into our own hands to control this.
Well, no, I wouldn't put it that way at all. I think
how would you do it?
This bill is saying that it's saying wherever there is harmful activity, then that should not happen, and no one can get a license if it is harmful activity to not only nature but also to the Rhode Island economy. If it's harmful, then it can't happen. It can't be licensed. But if somebody goes up and does that from a plane or by some other means anyway, well, then they must be fined $500,000.
At least, the very least. And I think that we should find out when they've done it before and find the paperwork for how long they've been doing it, because Bill Gates and these people, Carnegie, have invested in this environmental destruction that we all have damage from, whether it's our respiratory systems, immune systems, whatever. We don't get enough vitamin D anymore.
I think most importantly, what people always forget to mention is the neuro effects, which are first and foremost. When the atmosphere, for example, is contaminated with strange or man-made electromagnetic radiation, nobody can quite think right. Some people have headaches. Other people who are prone to seizures will have seizures. People can't focus. They may have inability to be calm and even people, let's say, who meditate, they won't be able to meditate because they're just agitated. That level of agitation and also zombification, frankly, are what come from electromagnetic geoengineering.
I'm smiling because I've had 2 instances of this. Right here in my family, we have a thing called fuzzy head syndrome. And we just, there's certain days where all of us are like, I really can't think straight. And we just thought it was just kind of a family thing.
Notice,
and then,
exactly. And notice how that is expressed. The sentence started with I, right, or we. In other words, there's an implication of blaming the victim, right, when that really is induced exogenously. It's induced by external factors.
Yes. And I had this other experience where, and I'll tell you exactly when this was. It was the day President Obama got elected it was 2007, right? Because it was 2008. He got elected and he won the election, and right across the sky, the whole entire sky that evening at sunset was covered with these trails, and the sun was setting and the whole entire sky was red. And I brought the kid's dad out to look at it, and I said, this is what these people are talking about. This isn't normal. And he's like, you know what? You're right. And he's not any sort of conspiracy person or anything like that. He just couldn't believe it. And then shortly thereafter, a couple days later, they did it again. And it was noticeable again for the kid's dad and I. And the whole entire neighborhood was fighting that night. Everybody was fighting. You could hear every family fighting. It was the craziest thing. We were in a fight about spaghetti or something, and the whole neighborhood was like in a it was the craziest thing. I'll never forget that.
Yes,
so
agitation and zombification, fuzziness.
Yeah.
As primary immediate neuro effects.
We've had that.
Let's keep in mind too that where you have metals being placed in the atmosphere, then you've got a much more conductive atmosphere. When those metals are then absorbed by human and animal and plant bodies, and then the plant and animal bodies, unfortunately, are then eaten by humans, the human's metallic content of the body increases strikingly, making the human body then even more conductive, even more absorbent of electromagnetic radiation, and therefore even more reactive to whatever electromagnetic radiation geoengineering activities are taking place, including those that are, in a sense, ground-based, such as, and these are included in the Rhode Island bill, by the way, implicitly, but this could include cell towers, mast antennas, for communications and military systems. So yeah, these have profound effects on people.
Yeah, I saw just recently that in the UK, the number one cause of death in women is dementia. And is that connected?
It is. I should add that with regard to dementia, many dementias are in part induced by way of perfume and hairspray usage, and also usage of certain household chemicals by women. So when you're talking about women who are, 60 to 90 years of age, and huge increases in dementia worldwide, but particularly in the so-called developed world, a lot of that has to do with personal chemical usage for cosmetics and maintenance cleaning. And then you add to that now the new electromagnetic factors that hadn't existed in the environment.
Okay, so that's this 5G, right? Is this what we're talking? And is that I saw that with Verizon?
Not really.
HT or
not really. Yeah, that's not really accurate. There have been different generations, or Gs, right, of wireless, 2G, 3G. 4G involves, Wi-Fi and mobile systems, and then 5G is a completely different thing. All of this radiation is completely different from cosmic radiation, from that which we get from the sun. All of that radiation is analog, a nice curvy sine wave, right? However, all of this radiation that we're talking about now, including even radio, FM, AM, radio, shortwave, and TV, is not analog. It's digital. It's pulse modulated. In some cases, FM means frequency modulated, and then AM means amplitude modulated. Amplitude modulation, for example, is where the intensity of the signal goes up and down and up and down, not in a regular way, but in an irregular way, and that pattern is actually what allows people to carry information or content that is then sort of decoded on the other end in the form of a radio. Pulse modulation is a form of amplitude modulation where the signal goes completely off between spikes of radiation. And pulse modulation is much worse on the body because of these spikes. It's like a signal that goes on, except many times per second. And then you have many of these signals differentially together simultaneously hitting people. And the thing is, we can't perceive these spikes consciously, but our brain feels them. Our brain is reacting to them. Our central nervous system is always reacting to them, as is every cell in our body. And so what we don't realize is that we're being hit by all of these things. These create the behavioral agitation that is observed. They create a lack of attention and focus that people can't help, but is the norm nowadays. And they also create fatigue, because this stuff that's very, very wearing. So people are at once fatigued and agitated from these spikes of radiation. This is the digital world, which involves spikes instead of a nice curvy wave. So when engineers, for example, or physicists think, oh, well, we get a lot more intensity of sunlight on a sunny day at noon than we do from this, they're completely, they're speaking just with either such ignorance or contempt that it's hard to decide which, because it can't be analog sine wave can't be compared with pulse modulated and frequency modulated wave.
So you brought something up about how it's agitating. Does this, like you said, it's the digital age, and people are putting their kids on drugs to keep them focused. And are those drugs going to do anything?
Well, first of all, I object to the whole term digital age. How dare someone come and dictate to us that we are now living in a digital age, so you better comply and you better be part of it. Why? That's really, I use that word dictatorial intentionally. that's a characterization that people actually should question and say, wait a minute, do I want to do that? Do I want to be part of that? I don't have to be a part of that, do I? I really? Why should my body be hit up with all of these spikes of radiation many times, even thousands of times per second? People should be thinking that way. Like, right. No, I don't want to live in the digital age. I want to be in a natural age. I want to be in an analog age. It's interesting, even the singer Paul McCartney pointed out that how to his ears, digital CD quality of sound is objectionable. And he doesn't understand how other people can really tolerate it. You know, he would rather go back to, I shouldn't say back, but forward to analog sound, which would be in the form of vinyl records. And indeed, you know, there are some stores now that are selling vinyl records.
Yeah, it's kind of making a comeback. It sure is. Sure is.
Yeah.
People are into
it. Because it's how our system functions. We are at base analog biological beings, as is all nature. We can't tolerate this pulse-modulated stuff.
Right. So back to my original question, the medicines that the parents are putting their kids on, is that going to help the kids at all?
No, it won't. It has no benefit for the child. It has only a supposed benefit for society, for the people around that child. And in fact, the child will be ruined by that medicine. If you look at the adverse effects, I don't like to call them side effects, right? That's part of an industry speak too, right? Side effect. No, excuse me. Scientifically, they are adverse effects. And some of them are very harmful indeed. And some of them even include death, right? At least early death. Everyone who takes those medications is going to be less functional and will die earlier than he or she would have.
Oh my gosh. Well, there's something. That's good information, and people should pay attention to that because a lot. Yeah,
but you know there are.
I want to say something too about, because I know you did your presentation about not RFID, but the frequencies in the public schools. Now, how is that going? That whole campaign of getting rid of the Wi-Fi in schools.
Right, and I don't call this frequencies, by the way. This is radiation. And it needs to be called radiation with a capital R. This is radiation. People need to understand it's radio frequency radiation. In fact, Wi-Fi is microwave radiation. Microwave radiation is the portion of the radio frequency spectrum that has always been understood to be most harmful. Why? Because the wavelengths are in the size of life, as I call it. Anything from a meter down to less than a millimeter. So you're talking about, you know, by definition, 39 inches down to, you know, tiny fraction of an inch. So these, and the important concept here is that as a wavelength approaches body part size, the absorption, of the radiation in that body part increases exponentially. So that, in a sense, it doesn't even matter how much or how little radiation is, harmful radiation, man-made radiation is out in the environment. If you have some pulse-modulated radiation from a neighbor who's kind of far away and it's barely measurable in your own home or apartment, if that radiation is at a wavelength that approximates important organs in your body, you're going to absorb much, much more of it. So it doesn't matter that the signal is purportedly at a low intensity. And low intensity is not correct either. Some of the engineers use that term. But low compared to what? Scientifically, what can we compare to? The only real scientific comparison is to natural background levels. So in schools, we have intensities that are hundreds of trillions of times higher than natural background levels that kids are being exposed to. And that radiation, there are usually two different wavelengths that are used for Wi-Fi. One of them is about 6 inches, and the other's a little less, like maybe about 3 inches, or 5 or 6 inches, something like that, and then 3 inches. In other words, these are wavelengths that very closely approximate dimensions of children's heads and brains, and hearts, and liver, and lungs, and thyroid, and thymus, and genitalia. Okay? Not just children's, everybody's, but the worst problem yet for children is that because their skulls haven't fully developed, the radiation is even much more penetrable. And even IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, pointed this out to the world about 15 years ago with pictures so that everybody could see graphically. Children absorb much more of this radiation. And so people wonder why they're not so-called well-behaved or why they cannot focus no matter how well you quote-unquote discipline them or how much you care for them and love them and maybe give them some medicine that's supposed to help it hurts. It won't work. The only thing that works is removing the Wi-Fi. Now, yesterday, I believe it was, there were hearings in Massachusetts on several bills, state bills, regarding Wi-Fi in schools, and unfortunately the people who wrote those bills didn't write them so as to get rid of Wi-Fi in schools. They just sort of wanted to modify it a little bit so it'd be a little different, so maybe not quite as harmful, but they didn't say get Wi-Fi out of schools because we have a completely different and less expensive and energy-saving alternative, which is wired internet, corded internet. You see, our bodies are built in a sense, cords, right? Our nerves are cords that are surrounded by really nice stuff called myelin that protects the signal inside. We are electrical beings, and when these electrons flow at the speed of light in our bodies through our nerves, then we're able to see and hear and perceive and taste and move in the environment and speak and learn and function. All of these things are based in electricity and even electromagnetism. So when we have these irregular man-made digital pulse-modulated signals at intensities trillions of times higher than natural background levels that being absorbed optimally by our brains, hearts, and other key organs, and even more so in children, our fate is sealed. And that's why the only thing that we can do is stop wireless radiation of all kinds. In our home, we have no wireless. Everything is corded. Nothing is
in my house,
energy.
We have Wi-Fi, and I'm sitting here saying, wow, this is horrible. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second. Do I want to get rid of the Wi-Fi in my house? Because I really don't. But at the same time, I'm listening to you. I'm like, I've got to.
You must.
Yeah, just get it wired. It's easy.
Yeah. And the thing is, see, this is not just what's happening in a moment in time either. They like us to think that, right? Oh, well, at this moment in time, you've got your Wi-Fi on, blah, blah, blah. You're getting this intensity. And they don't do the scientific thing, which is the reality, which is that you've got to multiply that then by 24/7, 365 forever. Now, when you do that multiplication, guess what happens to living bodies?
They just you just backfire.
They must break down.
Yeah.
They're breaking down in the moment. In the moment, every cell is being affected. I was at the Temple University Biophysics Lab, I think it was back in 2000, was invited there by the director, who was a prominent researcher, who had brought in the top Russian scientists to work on various research projects. And I just want to point out that the Russians knew this science better and earlier than anyone in the world. Okay? Eastern Europe was far advanced compared to the Western world. The earliest known study is by Moot in 1927, and he showed way back then that microwave radiation, even at the levels such as that are less than what you find in a typical school from Wi-Fi and whiteboards and so forth, that radiation created what he called the pearl chain formation phenomenon. And this is where the fats or lipids inside, he studied human breast milk, the fats inside the breast milk would line up in what was like a pearl chain, like a necklace. And that can be, we can think of, oh, well, that's kind of a nice thing. That's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Well, that's not an adverse thing, is it? Well, it is adverse because internally in the body, then, the fats are lining up in ways that they shouldn't and that prevent proper metabolism and that perhaps are helping to lead to the extraordinary obesity levels that we're seeing in society. Who knows, right? That connection hasn't necessarily quite been made yet, but he made that pearl chain formation observation as far back as 1927. Well, the Russians picked it up right away, and they were researching that. They even thought they were pursuing the hypothesis in the 1930s that centimeter microwave radiation, okay, so that would be from about a half an inch to, a meter or a yardstick, perhaps you could think, if you're thinking either in the European or the American system, that type of range of radiation, they thought that was the mechanism of psychic or intuitive activity. They understood that anything that sort of would resonate with dimensions of the human brain and of the human body would be very potent. And indeed, they were correct that it's optimally absorbed in a body part of approximately that size.
Go ahead. Continue.
Well, as the radiation, as a wavelength approaches a body part size, it not only increases exponentially, but then it increases exponentially toward resonance, where the body part becomes an antenna. Effectively an antenna. It's completely absorbent. It's buzzing with it. So, for example, and FCC, the U.S. government, the Federal Communications Commission is very well aware of this, and it's the reason why they always super highly regulated anything that approached the height of a man, like half the height of a man to 2 times the height of a man. In that range, oh boy, there had to be much less radiation of that sort in the environment, because what would happen if an RF, or radio frequency engineer, went up on top of a building or on top of a tower to change out an antenna or fix something, and accidentally one of the other antennas on the top of that building or tower were still on, even though they were supposed to have been turned off? That guy could so easily get fried just because of his height and because of the wavelengths that were being emitted by those antennas or deployed by those antennas. So this is why it's super important that there be no radiation in microwave radiation sizes, which are the size of life, the size of also not just organs in the body, but other body parts, and then ultimately cells and organelles within cells. So what happens now with what's coming, right, or what they intend to come, or what they're bringing already in some municipalities, it's called DAS, Distributed Antenna System. And first they're saying that it's just more 4G, but what they're really doing is riding on it 5G. So it's like 4G, 5G, DAS, Distributed Antenna System. And the reason they're doing it that way is that they want to be able to claim to municipalities and other governments that this is really just the same thing that you've already had, but they don't want to have to apply for new permissions for something that is completely, utterly, totally different than anything that's ever been deployed in the entirety of human history. Indeed, 5G deploys such extraordinarily wide broadband that if you took all of the radio, TV, microwave radiation, every kind of transmission that's ever been transmitted in the entirety of human history and put it together, 5G would exceed it.
And this has never been tested on people at all.
Of course it's been tested on people. It's been tested on people since 1927. It's been tested on human breast milk and on people and on animals and on plants since 1927. And that big lie that it's never been tested came out of the mouth of none other than former FCC chair, Tom Wheeler. And he did that, and he said, and we're not going to test this either, so that every little activist would go out there and say, it's not been tested. Excuse me, 25,000 studies. It's been tested. It's been established as real science, established, known science in the U.S., since the 1950s that this is a hazard. And in England, they were using Wi-Fi, same wavelengths, same intensities, same modulation characteristics. They were using in England for confession extraction. That means torture since the 1950s, since the Korean War. So let's not talk about this not being tested. Excuse me. It's been tested over and over and over again. Many people have been tortured. Many animals have been tortured. Plants have been tortured. Sorry to get angry, but that was a lie.
Even able to be allowed?
Well, for one thing, because, for example, insofar as we want to look at cancer or other long-term effects, right? Cancer is federally allowed. Cancer death is federally allowed. Like, cancer is a risk, they say. Cancer, 1 in a million deaths from cancer is perfectly acceptable. What if you got only 1 in a million, right? And we've got over 300 million people, that means that over 300 deaths from cancer is totally acceptable by law in the U.S., right? And not just cancer deaths. If 1 in a million cancer deaths are acceptable, then an infinite number of cancer incidences, that means people sick from cancer, are acceptable. In other words, there's nothing prohibiting something causing cancer except in one state, and that's California. California specifies that it has to, label things that are carcinogenic for its public. In California's Constitution, it has to provide for the safety of people, right? Which the U.S. Constitution doesn't do. Constitution supposedly allows you to hold or own a gun, but many, many people in our society, such as babies, children, and elders, can't use a gun. They don't know how to use a gun. They may not have one, right? I don't have one personally, but that's the only way that you can protect yourself with a gun. That won't protect you against any of this kind of weaponry.
Right.
So that's just looking at cancer alone.
But is there any way to protect yourself from this?
Yes. First of all, get rid of all wireless devices, right? I don't know. I've never owned a cell phone. People say, well, I'm dependent for my workplace upon it. Well, then, here's a challenge for you, okay? You're going to go to your workplace and say, this is actually a harmful device. It's even admitted in the paperwork for this particular device that it's not safe, okay? So therefore, I can't be forced to use an unsafe device for work. Therefore, I'm asking you to accommodate me in doing something different at work so that I don't have to do this. And people can use other arguments too because, for example, in France, it was found that employers were contacting employees at times other than work times. They were contacting them perhaps even around the clock. And of course that happens all the time in this country and all over the world as well. And the French people said, we object. We're here working for you already 8 hours a day. The rest of those hours are ours, not yours. And so the French government agreed and put that into law. Yeah, an employer may not contact an employee outside of work hours. So everyone in the world, first of all, has a right to that. So if the employer comes to you and says to you, well, yeah, but what if I need to contact you at 8 p.m.? You have to say, I'm not working at that time. I'm not required. That's not my work time. And then find other ways of doing it. Look, corded internet. Everybody had corded or wired internet who had internet 10 to 15 years ago. It's not abnormal. And it's far better than Wi-Fi, right? It works better. It's faster, more efficient. It doesn't get spotty when there's a heavy rainstorm or snowstorm, right? Or electrical storm. It works better.
Yeah. Okay. You're convincing me. You are convincing me.
Yeah. So how come, why were people convinced then? They see signs in some of their stores saying, cut the cord. Are you ready to cut the cord? Cut the cable? Come on. Are you ready to cut the cable? And so this became part of that internal psychological programming, and people fell for it. They saw it in stores. They saw it on their TV if they watch TV. By the way, I believed since the time I was 17 that I should not watch TV, and Jolie got that message strong and clear in her early life as well. And that's perhaps why we think differently than much of the population, right? Because we're not engaging in those things that have very subtle ways of entraining thought and compelling people to do things that they would never do if they understood the truth about those things.
Right. I like that you used the word entrainment. that basically is brainwashing. And another guest of ours recently, Catherine Austin Fitz, she used that word for the first time with us for us on Shadow Citizen entrainment. And and television is very much a purveyor of that.
Right. No one should have a television in a home, especially not at home with children, but not in any home. It is very important to get rid of the TV. I mean, and TV is now digital TV, which means that if I came with my meter inside your home to measure it, and if you had a TV, that digital TV box is also deploying microwave radiation at you throughout your home without necessity. When TV was analog, that didn't happen.
Okay, so all these different things that are in our homes, we've got the television, we've got these computers, we've got the Kindles, we've got our cell phones. All these things.
Wait a minute. Yeah, I mean, and many people do have those devices that they've been entrained to purchase and waste their money and their lives and their brains and their health. And literally, it's not just wasting the time of life that you acknowledge sort of that has been passed in the usage of the device, right? What is lost also is the end of your life, and that's what people are not calculating, because the devices are cutting more and more and more time off your life as you use them. Just as if you eat foods that are covered with nanoparticulates that came from geoengineering releases from planes, that's cutting off the end of your life too. And not just cutting off the end of your life. What it's meaning is that as you become older, you will be far less capable. It's cutting off your capability even when you're still alive. So when you calculate in the loss of capability before you die, and then you know that it's also making you die early, right? A day, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years. In some cases, these things are cutting off 30, 40 years of a person's life. How? And then you paid to buy that thing?
Multiple times over so you can have a brand new version. No, I know what you're talking about. I got rid of my TV when my kids were still in my belly. My kids are 12 years old now. Wow. And I haven't had a TV in my house since then. And I agree that talking to people that do have TV, and I don't want to try to alienate half the people listening to this show, but it is a very different experience. And you wouldn't recognize it until maybe somebody just tries this maybe for a few weeks to try to cut down on TV, or maybe if you watch 5 hours, go to 2 hours. And if you go to 2 hours, to kind of wean yourself off of it. Or you could just do cold turkey like I did and throw your TV in the front yard and then just deal with it. And you'll feel the, like when you quit smoking, you're going to feel that for about 3-4 days, like you're just going agitated, but then you're going to feel a lot better.
You'll feel freer. You'll have time. You'll think, wow, I could do other things with my time. What did I used to do? What did I used to want to do when I was a kid? Now I can do it.
Yeah, it is true. Mm-hmm. But coming back, we're going to go to our next hour pretty soon. I want to get back to Rhode Island's geoengineering bill and talk about that, and also talk about the stuff with the DOD and why all these things are now getting clommed up in the intelligence committees. Why is that happening? Because does it have to do with our military? It must. So that's what we're going to talk about the other half of this show. We're coming up on the halfway mark here. In the meantime, though, Jolie, why don't you let everybody know the websites people should be going to again?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Susan, thank you so much. You can go to zerogeoengineering.com to get involved in your state or in your nation. We're up on 7 countries so far, but this is really type of legislation that should be imposed everywhere. And there's a lot of great websites that you could go to. We're working with Suzanne Marr at Bye Bye Blue Sky and Pam Jones. We are working with many activists across the country who are pushing this legislation. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's doing that, because we have people in Maine, in California, Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida. So we're very fortunate.
Hey, right on.
I just want to may I just refer people to also Scientists for Wired Tech? Scientists for the number 4, Wired Tech.
Okay, and when we come back after this, we'll talk about that again, Aunt Jolie, no problem. All right, okay, we're back for the second half of our Shadow Citizen show this week, and we're talking to Jolie Diane and Susan Clarke, both of which have worked very hard on the Rhode Island bill on geoengineering. It's H6001, and I'm so happy both of them have returned to speak with us, because last week when I had them on, we had horrible internet problems, and I'm a little bit suspicious that might have happened on purpose, to tell you the truth. I don't really want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I'm getting my stuff looked at this week to make sure, because this is the second time this happened to me right before a very kind of important interview, and I think the information that's coming out with Jolie and with Susan Clarke is really important for the public to hear. So I want to pick up right where Jolie had left off. She was giving us some information about a website. She was really important for her to share it with us. Jolie, why don't you go right ahead and tell us that website again?
Hey, okay. Yes. A couple of the websites that are good, besides Scientists for Wired Tech, as Susan said, scientistsforwiredtech.com. And then another good site is parentsforsafetechnology.org, and whatis5g.info, and also 05g.com, as well as zerogeoengineering.com. And so those are a few places that you can start and do some research. And you were talking about the DOD before, Rachel.
Yes. Yeah, I really want to get into that, because like both of you have said, this has been going on for a really long time, and there's been some sort of, some sort of mind manipulation that's going on to make people feel like the people that are talking about this are somehow crazy. And they're not crazy, because it's a true thing that's been happening, but there's been this concerted effort to kind of silence conversation about this. And just this past year, I've noticed people talking more and more freely about it. And I think it's important that people do use the right terms. You mentioned in the first hour, the term people should use is geoengineering and not chemtrails.
Right. You want to use weather modification, geoengineering, solar radiation management. And what we're looking at is a psychological operation, because at the end of the day, this is a military operation. We're face to face with the military industrial complex. And I just want to read you the 11 agencies that are in this S141. You know, you mentioned that it was in the Intelligence Committee. Well, here's the people on the committee, some of them. We got the CIA, NOAA, DOD, NASA, NSF, Department of the Interior, FAA, Office of Science and Technology and Policy, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, and Department of State. So that is the organizing principle, the military industrial, that I think, we've finally come face to face with, because as you said, it's been very confusing for people to understand what's going on with the climate. Only people think, people unfortunately think, oh, it must be my fault. It's probably my fault about climate change, but it's wrong. They've been doing weather modification for so long, and I just want to point out something from the original document that I wanted people to look at with the National Science Foundation. And they say in this thing, they talk about the consequences of these programs. And, they had problems with the weather and climate modification and liabilities in 1916. I'm trying to pull this thing up. So it's not, they talk about 1930s experiments, weather and climate modification or rain making. with cloud seeding. And so it talks about in this article, in this document rather, in 1916, San Diego's employment of a rainmaker resulting in claims of loss of life and property damage of $1 million, anticipated by half a century of litigation and state and local legislative action of today. So this was written in 1965, and they were talking about rainmaking liabilities and property damage from 1916. So yeah, you're exactly right. People are not familiar with this science and technology. I'm certainly just learning about it, really. But that's what we have to look at, because at the end of the day, they're spending our money. The taxpayer money is getting spent in S-141. As you mentioned, H.R. 353 already was signed by Trump. And that one is the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act of 2017. That's H.R. 353. And in that, they do mention the Department of Defense weather forecasting activities. So you can just imagine, what are the weather forecasting activities? Well, geoengineering is rebranded. However, the DOD decides. And that's, again, these agencies that I listed off, they're very organized, they're very well-financed, and they have a plan to own the weather. And so, yeah, this is what we're talking about, and that's why the bill from Rhode Island is an opportunity for regular people and our legislators to say absolutely not. In fact, you are liable. Because, again, let's go back to 1916, when there was $1 million of claims, resulting in claims of loss of life and property damage. So that's, I think, what we're doing is putting the roadblock in there with this system, this H6011, rather, the Geoengineering Act of 2017. So, yeah, I'm really excited that Susan can be here with us to kind of break that down, because she brought so much to it in terms of, what we needed to target to protect human life from the electromagnetism.
Right. Now, Susan, can you please tell us about how the electromagnetism, because I think people have a hard time appreciating that electromagnetism and the stuff they're seeing in the sky is all the same sort of thing. The same process.
It's even hard for us to wrap our brains around it, right? But it is true. And by the way, I did want to point out, as Jolie said, this is Bill 6011. You had actually given an incorrect number when I was muted back then, so I couldn't say. But it's geoengineering involves often, mostly, large-scale changes to Earth's atmosphere. And those changes can be chemical agents, or the addition of chemical agents. It can be the addition of electromagnetic radiation contamination. So it can be either chemical or physical, and also biological or transbiologic. So there are lots of different things that are added to the atmosphere in a variety of ways, either ground-based or air-based, and in other ways. So when we, Jolie and I, try to get our brains around the electromagnetic part of it, of course it's harder because it's invisible, it's impalpable to most people, or when they do feel it, they don't realize that that's what they're feeling, that it's man-made microwave radiation in many cases. So I think that the key is understanding that as the atmosphere has lines in it that are, in a sense, drawn, right, by plane releases, and let's suppose that those lines contain a high concentration of metals, such as aluminum nanoparticulates or larger particulates. What results is the capacity to carry communication signals across the upper atmosphere. And this has been known as a military technology, a way of communicating outside the realm of ground-based radio and wireless communications otherwise. So it's a kind of strange thing. I mean, also, keep in mind that satellites are up there looking down at Earth with something stronger than eagle eyes. I once knew someone who was working in satellites, and this satellite technology is just beyond my comprehension even. The fact that the types of things can be seen from a satellite that those of us with any eye impairment, such as you talk about, or vision impairment, can't even see it here at ground level, right in front of our faces.
Right.
So it's pretty extraordinary. And however, the satellites use different kinds of wavelengths or frequencies in order to get from that altitude down to ground, or even below ground in some cases. They use normal visible light frequencies and also infrared, far infrared and close infrared, because they often have to get through fog and cloud and sometimes clear atmosphere, right, to get to ground. So consider what happens then if you have a sky that's absolutely covered with metallic particulates, and a satellite's trying to get through that. It's much, much harder for the satellite because most of those frequencies that are used can't get through a thick layer of metal. So one thing that militaries do is to cover the sky with metals when they don't want a foreign satellite to see what they're doing on the ground. Let's suppose a whole lot of troops were being deployed, say, from out of Long Beach, California, to go to some Middle Eastern country, and the U.S. military doesn't want other governments to know about it. Well, they cover the sky with these metals and make the ground much less visible.
But that's interesting because I used to work for a defense contractor and I was in marketing, and it was during when we first were going into Iraq, and I remember seeing the images of Iraq, the satellite images, and you could see the trails like as a grid pattern all the way up to the actual border of Iraq. You could see it covered with these grid marks. And I remember sitting at work going, wow, I wonder what the heck that's all about. And somebody said, they're just trying to block the satellites. So what you just said is true. That's true. Wow. Now, I know what's going on. I read this article in the National Law Review. Excuse me. And the very last sentence, or the very last part of this story says that we predict a growing need for geoengineering experts as well as law firms to draft weather modification contracts, represent weather contractors in adverse weather liability suits, as well as ensure fair competition among the weather contractors. And this is from last year, about this time last year. So this is from the National Law Review, and they're talking about, and the name of the article is Cloud Seeding, Make It Rain, Make It Stop, Monopoly on the Weather by Annie Dyke. So lawyers know that this is going on too, and these big businesses, like you said, are in business to do this. And just the normal people are not aware that this is even happening. So I think it's really good that the states get together to get their heads around how this business is going to be conducted in their states.
Right, or not, right? And how it's going to be either stopped, banned, regulated, right? Because these businesses want to get in here, get a foot in the door before there's any regulation. Of course, that's what they've been doing, in a sense, since 1916, right? There's been geoengineering going on, and perhaps even earlier, obviously, without any control.
Yeah.
Now, should there be like an air traffic control organization for this sort of stuff? Obviously, in Rhode Island, we're saying you're going to tell us what your intent is. You're going to tell us what you're going to be spraying, and you're going to tell us it's not going to hurt people. Now, should there be an organization or some sort of master control that says, okay, this is happening in Massachusetts, which is only 15 miles away over here, and we're in Rhode Island doing this? How can they get their head around how this is going to impact the planet if we're this close and everybody's doing it?
Well, it's a military operation. And I wanted to go back to what the electromagnetism factor in geoengineering and point out a document that's important for people to look at regarding DoD management issues related to shaft. And this is a 1998 document commissioned by Senator Harry Reid. It's a government accounting office. And in this document, it talks about shaft, and shaft is aluminum with coated glass fibers. It's used because the electrical conductivity is important because shaft absorbs and reflects electromagnetic energy to create a radar echo. So
there it is.
Military operations, and then it goes on in this report, which you can find at the website, to talk about the non-compliance issues in terms of air quality, and they spell it out in black and white. They say air quality issues addressed in the report include the potential for 1, non-compliance with national air quality standards due to the release of significant quantities of particulates, 2, release of hazardous air pollution emissions, and 3, visibility impairment. So this report takes into consideration the Clean Air Act. So, they know in 1998 that they couldn't comply, and they've been able to hide these things because it's, they've been able to hide it under research and weather modification. It was called for a long time, and we haven't been calling out weather modification. We didn't know what these programs were, so that's what's kept us, kind of from getting any traction until now when we have a definition for these programs, and we're going to target them as pollution emitters.
Okay. So we're going to target them as pollution emitters. Is there any, for instance, like I said, Rhode Island is very small, 15 miles away, and if you go to your left 15 miles, you're in Connecticut. If you go straight ahead up top, you're going to be in Connecticut, or Massachusetts is straight above us and Connecticut's to our left. What can we do to protect ourselves from the stuff that's going to be filtering in from those states?
Well, one thing that the bill does, it talks about airplanes or other aircraft that would be flying over the state of Rhode Island. So any of that airspace is considered to be relevant under this, or to fall under this bill, if passed as an act. So that, in that way, even if an aircraft wants to, go from Connecticut through Rhode Island into Massachusetts and off to the ocean, that requires a license through Rhode Island. And what that might force is an airplane to go from Connecticut over to Massachusetts directly instead, in which case Massachusetts might start to recognize that, hey, we're getting contaminants that were supposed to have been over Rhode Island. We don't like this. So go ahead, Massachusetts.
Send this junk back to Rhode Island where it belongs. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I just wanted to mention, too, that going back through history, as Jolie has been doing, this has been going on and has been conceived so far in the past. This is not new. This doesn't need experimentation. They can call things experimentation. They can say, oh, we need research, and everybody backs that. Oh, sure, we need research. We need more science. No, where you already know that something is a hazard, you don't go out and then use that hazard, deploy that hazard, to use the correct word, upon the public, right? And so this is known to be a hazard and cannot be deployed or used for research. By 1965, publicly, the effects of, say, microwave radiation were very well known, especially the neuro effects. And so by 1968, there was actually an amendment to the Public Health Service Act that was actually October 18th, 1968, that stated that the public must be protected against the radiation emissions of electronic products. And that stands to this day. So that means that anything, any electronic product, large or small, right, deployed within our homes or outside or from cell towers or whatever, technically we have the right to be protected against those emissions. I would point out also that in 1991, IEEE, again, that's an industry group, right, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, was hired by FCC to produce public exposure guidelines for the public. And they looked at, per their own word, some 20,000 studies. Now, you don't get 20,000 studies unless something is really, really, really well studied, and unless there's really something happening. If you don't see effects, you're not going to get anybody, either governments or private people, investing in looking at the effects, right? So here, 20,000 studies out at that time, nearly 25,000 now. And just before they did their review, there was a special public health science committee convened under the Bush administration to do a review of radiofrequency radiation bioeffects. And I know one of the persons who participated in that was Dr. David Ozanoff, formerly the chair of of all of Boston University's School of Public Health. Very fine scientist, very well-rounded, and a person who knew high-level mathematics and radiofrequency radiation and many, many other areas of science very, very well as the chair of that department. Well, it turns out that committee was gagged by the Bush administration at that time and told not to reveal their conclusions, which were that, this is really harmful. This is a hazard. So they were gagged. Anyway, now the industry comes out through IEEE to do a new review of the literature. And guess what they concluded? This is a hazard. And they created what they called a hazard threshold. They said, well, it's a hazard, but below this level, not much occurs, really. Well, it turns out that amongst the 120 studies that IEEE chose to prove its hazard threshold, consider it like a line in the sand, there were actually 15 studies that showed harm at levels of lower intensity than that. And then they said, well, we built in a 10% safety factor. So, really we even though, we say that the hazard threshold is here, we're protecting the public by, 10 times better than that. But guess what? Amongst their 120 studies, 3 of those studies that they chose to prove their hazard threshold showed harm at lower levels than that. And since that time, since the early 90s, many more studies have come in showing harm at lower and lower and lower intensities. And especially so because when you add modulation, when you add other parameters that increase the harmfulness of the radiation, you see that there is no safe level. It's a hazard to everyone. So even the industry acknowledged hazard as far back as 1991, and technically before that too, because there were government groups acknowledging the harmfulness in the West, by the 1950s, and actually, again, using radiation very, very similar to school Wi-Fi for torture, for confession extraction. In 1997, FDA, Food and Drug Administration researcher Howard Basson investigated medical device interference, and he found that many people had been, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people had been injured, at least, by medical device interference, because when you have a signal coming, let's say from a cell tower for a cell phone or Wi-Fi or this or that, of course Wi-Fi didn't exist at that time, but it was many other signals, this radiation could suddenly stop a wheelchair and a person could be thrown out of it, and that did happen many times. People ended up bruised with their noses broken and such, and those things were reported upon. People's pacemakers would stop, their hearing aids would squeal, all sorts of medical device interference problems were noted, and he concluded that there had been 10 tens of thousands of deaths already at that time from medical device interference. So look at what would happen then if municipalities and states actually did allow 5G to come in. There would just be unbelievable intense interference with medical devices, as well as with, as I said before, body parts, and particularly with insect pollinators' antennas, which are in the sizes of 10 of the wavelengths used for 5G.
Okay. All right. So
sorry, that was a mouthful.
I think we concluded that this is a horrible type of technology for the planet and for the people. What is the driving? Obviously, there's money behind this. There's got to be tons of money behind this to really keep pushing this forward. What is the end game for this type of technology? I know they're going to do the smart refrigerators and the smart meters and the smart everything, but and I've heard of this thing called the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything. What is the end game for this? It can't just be that so people can watch streaming movies on their cell phones faster. What's the end game?
Or you mean what is the purpose?
Like why do this?
Right. And keep in mind, we always still have some choice to stop this. No one has to participate in this game, this fatal game. It's not merely Russian roulette. This is a hazard, and it will take out the entirety of the biosystem. Okay, so now is the time for people to say no to it. But what is certainly intended, as I mentioned earlier, is ecogenocide.
And can I just chime in because the bill?
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Was just, and this is totally related. The bill HR 353 that Trump has already signed clearly in black and white says part of it research and development and transfer of knowledge, technologies, and applications to the National Weather Service and other appropriate agencies and entities, including the United States weather industry and academic partners related to advanced radar networking technologies, and other ground-based technologies, including those emphasizing rapid, fine-scale sensing of the boundary layer of the lower troposphere and the use of innovative dual polarization phased array technologies. And that is what the CIA was referring to with their SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, which is a form of geoengineering. So it's the big guns. It's the big guns, and at least, we're having a conversation. That's what the great thing is. We're having a conversation because a lot of people just thought, oh, climate change, it's my fault. No, it's not our fault. They're controlling the weather. They're owning the weather, and we're part of the experiment. It's absolutely unacceptable. And, we're taking steps in Rhode Island. We're bringing up the conversation, like, nationally and internationally. So it's fantastic.
Can I ask a question? Since you've said that,
Sure.
Just that made me think about this. If they are trying to convince people that they are doing all of this geoengineering for the benefit of cooling the planet or saving us from, climate change, is it possible that they actually warmed the planet up on purpose?
Absolutely. And the correlation of climate problems is exact. The industrialization. Our problems with the climate have been just increased dramatically because it includes pollution. Emissions pollution from electromagnetism and aerosol pollution emissions, and exhaust emissions from the aircraft and geoengineering. Right. So, imagine eliminating these pollutions, not saying greenhouse gas. Water's a greenhouse gas, water vapor. And our breath is certainly not a pollutant. How about instead we go after the real emissions polluters, the emissions that we can see? It's sad that people think that the air they're breathing out is toxic, but they think that what's coming out of an airplane is just water vapor.
Right. Now, this brings me back to this experiment that was very publicly announced from Harvard, where they want to simulate a volcano exploding by putting sulfuric acid into the air, and that's supposed to, what I don't understand it, but they're saying that putting the sulfuric acid into the air will cool off the planet, and to me, it just, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. That doesn't seem like a smart thing to do, to put sulfuric.
Well, it's a trick. And we got a hint of that trick long ago when, someone who was working for the airlines, revealed some things early on in the early 2000s about the intentions of the military intelligence industrial complex, as Eisenhower actually penned in his original speech, military intelligence industrial complex, about these intentions. This person went into a high-level meeting at which he had to promise that he wouldn't reveal anything, and he actually did afterward, thankfully. And the airlines were proposing that the military industry people were proposing that commercial airliners be fitted with extra sprayers so that they could release some extra chemicals too, like military jets. And the people from the various airlines were asking many questions about this, and one of the pressing questions was, well, what are the chemicals that you want to release? And they said, well, that's proprietary. We classified information. We can't give you that. And then someone asked this person who reported on, well, why can't you? And the answer was, quote, because environmentalists would protest, unquote. So, if environmentalists would object, it's because it's harmful to biological systems. So what they're doing is calling things falsely experiments where they know that there will be harm and they know approximately what the harm will be. They're just doing them intentionally. So they use the word experiment as a cover for what they really intend to do, which is to create widespread harm to living organisms. Right.
Now, I know that there's been about a dozen new cloud types introduced to the world idea of what clouds look like, and I think they call them homogeneous. Is that true? It's like a dozen different. Some of them look like waves. Other ones look like bulby, like just really globules in the sky. Other ones that. So I'm thinking of my kids in school. They're learning about weather, and they're learning the cloud types, and they're doing their quizzes and tests about this. But they're literally announcing there's a dozen new cloud types that are all man-made clouds. And Go ahead.
Made of aerosol pollution, and we know what's in it. It's aluminum, barium, strontium, sulfur, biologicals. I mean, there's all kinds of things in it, and we know it's harmful, and that's the thing. It's a form of abuse, and that's the thing. We're so used to being abused, that we think somebody like David Keith, a professor, this professor, that professor, PhD, this guy thinks that the planet's too warm. Well, hang on. The planet doesn't. See, it's complex. The planet's not all one temperature, and then it goes up a degree. And this is where they're depending on people not to ask questions like photosynthesis. We need the sun. We need the sun for our plants, and we need it for our, health. And you look at the correlation of when they really started these programs back, ramping them up in the 90s, huge increase in depression, right?
Right.
Huge increase in depression. And then you take a pill for it. And then the pharmaceuticals get rich. And so, I mean, this has been a handoff through generations, and, going back, what's the end game? It's the Agenda 21. They want one world carbon dictatorship, and they're, trying to brainwash people into thinking that it's our fault, that there's a problem with the climate, when actually it's just methods of pollution and environmental warfare being waged by the military industry and hidden behind a cloak of S141 or HR 353, just so they can have financing for these programs through 2028, I think it is. So,
right. they obviously know what's going on. Monsanto has already developed a seed that can be planted that is aluminum resistant. Why would they do that? Why would they do that unless they knew there'd be a lot of aluminum in the soil?
Yeah, if you want to own the market, you just get rid of the competition. So they get rid of the organics, and then, we have the seeds you need. And guess what? Yeah, they're aluminum resistant, like you said. So, Bill Gates, really, for environmental pollution, that would be one person that's responsible for the damages. How many millions has that guy invested? But he didn't make up the programs. Again, these programs have been going, for decades and decades, and it's just up to us now that we figured out what's going on and this massive increase in health problems. Here's a couple things. If we eliminate this kind of pollution and fine it heavily, and going for war crimes too. If you fine for war, we're going to be fining our, federal government. But again, it's like, we have to stand up. Nobody can have liberty if we're getting geoengineered or 5G.
Right.
Or electromagnetism. We can't have it.
Right. You brought up a term that many people listening to this show probably are aware of, but for the new people that are kind of coming on board with this, you said Agenda 21. What's Agenda 21?
Agenda 21 was signed by George Bush Sr. in 1992. And it's a plan for world governance with the UN. And, Al Gore, it's built on the carbon myth. They've kind of demonized carbon, and they built a whole infrastructure and grid, as you were saying, the Internet of Things. And so, basically it's just the game that's been going on for decades and centuries. You have this organizing component, the 1%, and their investment is getting rid of the rest of us, making life very hard for us with war and stuff. And there was a paper written, How to Wreck the Environment, written in 1966 by PhD Gordon MacDonald. And so the very idea of destroying the planet, this is a way to wage war, and you don't have to have any it's plausible deniability because, hey, it's just Mother Nature. That was the earthquake there or the tsunami there or the hurricane there. But meanwhile, we have this research for hurricanes and tsunamis in HR 353 and S141 with the space weather. So, it's very organized. And no one up until this point has gotten the opportunity to call it out and name the abuse, name the problem, and then further to make demands of this. Hang on a second. What are you doing, military-industrial complex? You don't have any legitimacy.
Okay, so this is what you're saying. So Rhode Island's now I want to make sure I get this right, H6011, that's the bill, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're saying that bill in little old Rhode Island, if that passes, that will be the first one in the country to pass. That would be able to, and the idea is that other states around Rhode Island and hopefully around the world will start passing this sort of legislation to be able to get a witness on what's going on and push back against this Agenda 21. Isn't it called something else now too? Agenda
2050.
Yeah.
And you can look up the map for UN Agenda 21 in 2050 now. Because Agenda 21 is 1992 language. And you can actually listen to the speech that was given by G.W. Bush on September 11th, 1991. You can just YouTube it. And he talks about a new world order. And basically he's releasing sovereignty of the United States. He's getting rid of sovereignty. And this is when the lines were blurred because in these documents for weather modification and owning the weather, the military is collaborating with NATO. They're collaborating with the UN. Hang on a minute. Where is our military? It's just an industrial machine. So, again, that's why it's important that we're having this conversation now because, like Susan said, the world doesn't have to go down this road. We can see that it's destruction. It's not acceptable for the young people and, our families and this planet. We're past the time when we need to have dictators. we can organize ourselves. And the first thing of shutting down these invasive technologies to comply with public health and safety standards and environmental standards, that's a reasonable thing that we should be pushing for,
Right.
and pushing back against this, this invasive, harmful, reckless, unsafe technology.
Right. Now, I know that in Rhode Island, because that's where I am, people probably don't know much about this. And I'm very glad we're having this conversation. I'm going to push this out all over the place on the internet as far as I can. And I hope people that are listening, it's going to be shared on YouTube, Vimeo, and SoundCloud, as well on BitChute. And I really hope people will pass this on once it's saved at those locations. It's also on American Freedom Radio, their archives too. I was thinking that just for the people of Rhode Island to get their head around this, what's the difference between a resolution, like say there was a resolution or a referendum where people could vote during the next election? It says something as simple as, "We the people of Rhode Island and Providence plantations object to any sort of geoengineering or use of its skies for, the geoengineering or blah, blah, blah." Like that would be something I think everybody in Rhode Island would sign. They wouldn't want chemicals dumped on them. They wouldn't want to be irradiated. It seems like that would be something that would at least get into all the papers and people would be right behind that. Now you've got this bill going on, which sounds fantastic, and I hope people support it, is H6011. And what's the difference between a resolution or referendum and the bill? Either one of you.
Okay. I don't know Rhode Island state government well enough to talk about those differences, but because I've never lived there. But certainly you might want to do that. But even a petition with the language that you just used, not as concerned citizens. No, don't go there, right? The people of Rhode Island, people who have their domiciles in Rhode Island, people who live and work in Rhode Island, are the ones who should sign to say that they don't want geoengineering programs and that they support the 6011, and that it's even those, and I know there will be those, by the way, in Rhode Island who don't want the bill because they want to make a ton of money off of their own pet geoengineering program. We've already heard from some of them.
Oh, really?
And the amazing thing is that it's just making an equal playing field even for all of them, because why should you be allowed to do your thing without getting a license to do it? Nobody can even go out and get a massage unless that person, that masseur or masseuse, has a license. So why should you be able to go out in the ocean or above in the atmosphere and do something that has huge consequences without a license? Go get your license, and if it's something that is beneficial and not harmful, you'll get your license. Right? There's a minimal fee for it, and then you'll be able to do it, right? What are you afraid of? But there are people who oppose it because they don't want it to even have to tell what they intend to do because they know it's harmful. They just want to make a buck.
Right.
And those are the people we've heard from already.
Really? About how many of those businesses did you hear from?
Just a handful, not even a handful. But the fact that has even come to our attention means they are out there, right? So,
wow.
But certainly the people of Rhode Island will much overwhelm that near handful, and should definitely get together and start signing with their real, raw, live signatures, and their municipality, their support of the bill and their opposition to geoengineering activities of all types that are harmful.
Okay. So let's take this very basic now. Jolie, maybe this is your level of expertise, but either one of you can answer. So if somebody's in Rhode Island, this is already on the table, this RI bill H6011. should people go to the State House? Should they, you said to their local, could they go to town hall? Should they go to, where should they go? Or where should they call?
That's a great question. The first thing that you can do is contact your assembly member, your representative. And if you come to zerogeoengineering.com to the Take Action, you can send a letter off from there. We've gotten lots of letters from Rhode Island. And you contact your assembly member and you let them know your strong support for H6011. And, just a short note, we've also had friends of ours, activists, that have gone in and visited the Natural Resources Committee members and just gone and left a copy of the bill and just, gone from office to office and said, thanks for looking at this. I really support this strongly. And, the bill has received incredibly strong support. So we just need to continue to do that. You can also hand out flyers. We'll send you some flyers, some business cards for Zero Geoengineering and 5G so that you can be the person out front just bringing people's awareness to these issues and what they can do to be a part of derailing these invasive technologies and these pollution emissions.
I just want to say there in Rhode Island, more than any other state, there is a huge danger that may be overlooked and that really should be part of perhaps a legal document called a petition, a general petition. And that is that your governor has called for Rhode Island to be the experimental state for 5G.
I know.
This is why, we need to tie these two together. Zero engineering, zero 5G. And when we put them together, then we win. And the bill is actually somewhat protective if they can pass the bill in time, but you've got to include that 5G part because otherwise they are really trying to shove that in every neighborhood, on every farm. They want to actually put what they call a small cell, but it's actually a real tower, a real cell tower with, in the sense of having real powerful antennas on every farm, in wildland, in forests, everywhere, ubiquitously throughout Rhode Island at ground level. So this is, in a sense, an atmospheric deployment from ground that is ground-based. And it would absolutely devastate Rhode Island's agriculture, its forests, coasts, fisheries, everything. It would be disastrous.
Now, when you said our governor, she is a Republican. This is not, what we're talking about is not a political issue. This is a health issue. However, I could see easily people getting hot under the collar because she's a Republican and she's pushing this. So.
Oh, I don't even, look, I didn't even know what party she was, frankly. That's
No.
I'm
not saying you did that. But I could see people in Rhode Island, because we are so polarized because of this past election and everything else, they're going to jump right away. And a lot of the Republicans will then now side with her just because she's like a singular Republican in government here in Rhode Island, which is usually Democrat. We're pretty Democrat.
Well,
state.
The answer to that is this. If you pair geoengineering with zero 5G, then it's great because you've got a Republican who has sponsored 6011. So you've got Republicans on both sides of this, one for, one against, and then it doesn't really matter.
Good.
I don't personally engage in partisan politics at all, and this is not merely a health, quote unquote, issue, right? This is a disaster. This is not just health. It is all life on Earth, ultimately, but to start, it's all life in Rhode Island is really threatened, truly threatened. And I know people don't want to believe that, it's, Chicken Little story, whatever.
I know.
I mean, I have a strong scientific background. I don't know that you knew about my background, but I, did 10 years at Harvard School of Public Health, aiming toward a doctorate, which I didn't receive because of having to go out and help communities, and I simply didn't have the time anymore to complete that. But I have a very solid background in radiofrequency radiation bioeffects to the point that I was the person whom Harvard sent out to do lectures and debates and so forth in the public on media and in communities. So if I were to say anything that were less than true, I mean, I would suffer terribly, right? So I'm being accurate when I say Rhode Island is under threat by the governor to be made a mere experiment, which of course it's not, because we know what the adverse effects are by this governor. And I don't care what party she is. I think many people don't care anymore which party someone is. It's
a health and safety issue, period, you know.
No, it's not. No, it's not. That's my whole point. It's not merely health. It's not merely safety. It's not merely an issue. This is life on Earth. This is the biosystem. It's ecogenocide. And that's why it's not just even a problem. It's a disaster brewing. And it has to be stopped, and it can be stopped. In Ohio, for example, 16 cities sued their state after the state of Ohio said, yeah, we really want 5G and Internet of Things here, right? And other states and cities are starting to resist too. Over 100 cities in California alone have said no to Senate 649, the California bill to bring in, to welcome in 5G and the Internet of Things. So it's possible. But
okay, so I want to interrupt you. You said something very specific at the beginning of this whole thing. You said everybody in Rhode Island, they have to do a general letter, or they have to do, you had a specific term that we were supposed to do against the governor.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say that it's against the governor personally or otherwise.
Oh, no, about what
it's against the policy.
Yeah.
It's against the policy. Right.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, tell me specifically
who proposes that policy. But in fact, in a legal letter called a petition, right? You don't want to use any term like concerned citizens, right? Whiny concerned citizens, that's what they consider that to be, right? Both terms are not helpful, okay, to say the least. And actually, the word concern gets your petition immediately dismissed out of the door, but for other reasons. But you want a petition that states that this must not happen in Rhode Island, and that then here are the reasons. You know, here are the scientific reasons why this must stop and not go forward.
Okay. And that we will do that, and we will also pass H6011. And those two things should have us covered, right? Hopefully.
You will do very well to get those powerfully induced. Now, once that happens, then you want to help other states to do the same thing so that Rhode Island has more power. And I just want to acknowledge this wonderful tiny state of Rhode Island as having had the courage way, way back when the U.S. Constitution was first being discussed. The little state of Rhode Island refused to sign on because there were no rights of persons in Rhode Island, right? And no, we are not going to do this until you have a Bill of Rights in here. And that is how all of us Americans, more than 300 million of us, actually have a Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. It's thanks to Rhode Island. So Rhode Island, do it again. You can. The most powerful tiny state of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, well, awesome. Now listen, we've got maybe, 4 minutes left. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Repeat some websites that people could go to, or once again, drive home the point that, here we go. I'm sorry. This is it,
okay,
man.
I just want to give this website.
But I will put this all on the website for everybody, on the YouTube stuff. Thank you so much. I want to thank our audience for tuning in. We'll be here next week. I want to thank our guests, Jolie Diane and Susan Clarke. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.